if you know the word globalization, now today there are many ways to interpret the word globalization. On one hand, some people are saying because of the globalization, we are going to see more and more inequalities, politically speaking and also economically speaking. But meanwhile, another interpretation of globalization that means more conflicts, especially related to territorial disputes. For example, lately, if you follow the news closely, you must have known regarding the territorial dispute between the nation of Serbia and also another nation which is called Kosovo. Now, we know that this region, or again, this country where a majority of the population is ethnic Albanian and Muslim. Now, Kosovo declared its independence from Serbia in 2008. However, Serbia has now officially acknowledged the independence of this nation. What gives? And how should we understand the ongoing tension? And also, not too long ago, this tension caused so escalating that people actually died, and because of the border dispute. Well, in this episode, we're going to dive into the details. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to introduce our great speaker, which is Adam Rousselle. Again, Adam Rousselle is a regular contributor for the Militant Wire, and also he's an expert on geopolitics and also on international economy. Well, Adam, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you, Will. Good to be here.
Absolutely. I am very excited about our conversation. Now, Adam, I want to get started with the first question. As we mentioned before, this ongoing conflict between Serbia and Kosovo, it's not a stranger to anyone. But again, on the daily basis today, if we follow the news closely, the tension is getting much more serious, and also is getting more attention internationally. Now, help us with better understanding. How should we understand the situation today? And also, what do we know regarding the current or the latest update between the two countries?
Well, in terms of what's happening right now, I guess a little bit of background would be useful. Kosovo was formed out of Serbia following a NATO intervention in 1999. When the country was declared independent, there were about 300,000 ethnic Serbs living inside the country, mostly concentrated in the northern border region. Most of these people see themselves rather as Serbians rather than Kosovars, and they have claimed that they face discrimination inside the country. This kind of reached a boiling point this year where there's about 140,000 of these ethnic Serbs left in the country. A lot of them have emigrated across to Serbia or elsewhere in the world. And there had been a dispute where Serbia was issuing license plates to these people, and Kosovo was fining people carrying these Serbian plates. The two countries reached an agreement on this, but the ethnic Serbs were not satisfied with the situation. They actually voted or chose to not participate in local elections. And so when the local elections took place, dominantly Serbian areas of the country elected ethnic Albanian leaders by default. And this is where a lot of the protesting has come about, because as the Kosovar government has tried to install these local Albanian leaders, the Serbians have not accepted them, and there have been widespread protests. As of late, NATO peacekeepers have gotten involved. There's been clashes between them and Serbian protesters. And what this could mean broader, I guess we'll get into more into the discussion.
Adam, again, as we mentioned in the intro, it's interesting that back in 2008, Kosovo has already officially declared its independence from Serbia. But meanwhile, so far, this recognition or this independence has not been fully recognized by the government of Serbia. Now, again, most of us who aren't familiar with the history, unfamiliar with the factual information, Adam, which you are, you're an expert, walk us through. What are the main reasons for the Serbian government to refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of the Kosovo government. What are the reasons? I mean, don't you think it's better that we have peace rather than conflict, or rather than wars, even casualty of conflict at this moment?
It's a very contentious issue, and not just for Serbia, to be fair. If you look at a map of countries that recognizes versus don't recognize Kosovo, it's actually almost even. There are a great number of countries that don't recognize Kosovo independence, and a great number that do. Among Kosovo's biggest supporters are most of NATO, with the exclusion of Spain, the United States being the largest, and the U.S. military was the one that led the intervention. The main issue that Serbia takes against Kosovo sovereignty is that they claim it was through foreign intervention that this independence was achieved, and they don't recognize that intervention as legal. And so, in their eyes, Kosovo is still part of Serbia, although they do recognize it as being a territory that they don't currently control.
Adam, again,
so it's a sort of, a partial de facto recognition, but they don't legally or officially recognize its sovereignty.
Sure, Adam. Again, you mentioned the role of the UN peacemaker. Again, based on the latest report, and the current Serbian president criticized NATO's peacekeeping mission. And again, this is what it says. It's basically the intervention from the UN peacemaker is illegal and forceful takeover of the majority Serbian territory, by the Kosovoan government. Now, what do you make of the statement from the Serbian government? Because we know that when we have UN peacemaker jump in, this is pretty much the role of being a mediator. And again, we don't want to see conflict. We surely don't want to see deaths on either side. But the Serbian government, it's a very firm in terms of their intervention and also the assistance or help, or whatever you call it, from the UN peacemaker. Why the criticism? And is there anything that we're missing based on the Serbian president's comments?
The Serbians are primarily concerned with the presence of NATO, because let's not forget that it was a NATO mission that brought about this independence. The issue here is, while NATO is ostensibly acting to maintain the peace, they're doing so at de facto at the behest of the interests of the Kosovo government. So when they are trying to keep peace in the streets and stuff, it's the Serbians who view that as their legitimate right to protest. Now, these protests have become violent, but it's the Serbian contention is, why are these NATO troops operating in territory that we recognize as sovereign to us? And so that's their main contention. It is worth noting, however, that NATO and particularly Washington have made repeated calls to both the Kosovo and Serbian governments to de-escalate the situation. And particularly with this situation in Kosovo, it's really gone to little avail. So although there's been an increased NATO troop presence, NATO's ability to actually de-escalate, get Pristina, which is the capital of Kosovo, to de-escalate the situation is becoming very difficult for them.
Adam, again, you mentioned that, again, in your analysis, that both NATO and the West are doing everything possible to de-escalate the situation, but to little avail. Again, at this moment, we have to ask the question, what role should we expect the West to play at this moment? Again, we've heard the statement from the current Secretary of the State, and also, again, we ask the questions to the higher officials in the U.S. government. But at this moment, again, based on your analysis, both the NATO and the West contributed so much, but somehow the results and also the impact was not that significant. So what can we expect from the U.S. perspective to do more in order to de-escalate the tension between Serbia and Kosovo government at this moment?
Sure. I mean, I personally try to avoid giving direct policy recommendations, but the situation on the ground is that NATO has inherited or has essentially entered into this de facto alliance with the Kosovar government by keeping peacekeeping troops there and just by recognizing its sovereignty, and so it's become its own liability in this regard. The situation has escalated in different ways on both sides. So in recent weeks, we've seen Kosovar authorities arrest Serb nationals living within Kosovo. One man named Milenkovic was arrested in connection with clashes with NATO troops. Another man was arrested reportedly in connection to the war that occurred in 98, 99. And so, and he's been charged with war crimes apparently. And so it really cuts deep at the ethnic tensions within Kosovo. The Serbians, for their part, have taken into custody 3 Kosovar police officers on arms trafficking charges. And it's not clear if they were arrested either within Serbian territory or if Serbian nationals crossed into Kosovar territory and arrested them there and brought them back into Serbia. They're currently being held in Belgrade. The President Vučić is also not being clear on this point, but it remains very difficult for the West to have any direct impact on Serbian policy at this time. But it seems increasingly less likely that they're able to control the Kosovans as well. So what they're able to do with this and how they'll de-escalate this, I guess we will see in the coming weeks. But it seems like both sides are committed to escalating right now. So how that's managed really will take. If they do it right, it will have to be very skillfully maneuvered.
Adam, to be honest, when we look at such dispute or such conflict, that too often we link to the word politics, or we can easily interpret it as territorial dispute. But meanwhile, again, because you're the expert, I want to bring another word into our conversation. It's called ideology. Now, Adam, from your perspective, the reason, again, based on the research, some experts believe the reason why we've seen the conflict or the ongoing conflict between Serbia and Kosovo, because simply the history or ideology, again, all tying together. Adam, your interpretation, how much do you think it actually has something to do with political ideology or the historical ideology so that the tension between the two countries has started to escalate? Or as you mentioned before, it seems like both sides refused to back down and wanted to really reaching the boiling point until one side started to back down, or we're going to see another type of result. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know if ideology is how I would describe it, but there's certainly it's deeply rooted in ethnic tensions. Serbia was in a position after the fall of the Soviet Union where different ethnic groups across Yugoslavia sought to gain independence. And of course, Yugoslavia being centrally run from Belgrade, which is the capital of Serbia, there were multiple wars to avoid this national breakup. And so, Croatia, Slovenia was the first, then Croatia. It was a short but pretty brutal war with Croatia. The war with Bosnia was especially brutal. And then, of course, Kosovo broke away, and Montenegro has since broken away as well. So Serbia has been left from, essentially being the center of a very large territory, being a very small one. The roots of the conflict between ethnic Albanian Kosovars and Serbians go very, very deep. Serbians allege that it was the Ottomans who purposefully sent Albanians, Muslim Albanians, to southern Serbia as a sort of colonial tactic during the time when that part of the world was under the Ottoman Empire. The Kosovars claim that their descendants are much older than Serbia itself, and that they date back to the Illyrians. So they both have these, self-described deep ethnic ties to the territory, and this really wasn't so much of an issue during the time of Yugoslavia, but as the country started to break down, these different groups began to demand their sovereignty, and when that situation happened in Kosovo, it resulted in a very terrible series of clashes, where there were death squads on both sides, and some of the worst atrocities in the Yugoslav wars were committed in Kosovo. So it really does cut deep, and it would be very difficult for those two territories to ever reunify, given the recent and bloody history there. In terms of ideology, I think now the two have split, where Kosovo is a much more Western-backed project, whereas Serbia is a very close ally of Russia, and Russia's only ally really in that region.
Adam, two more questions before letting you go, because I was going to ask you regarding the country of Russia. Again, historically speaking, that Serbia was allied with Russia. And again, I think today when we look at the war in Ukraine, and everyone still talk about the modern conflict, one country invaded intentionally or purposefully to another. Now, Adam, the next question, very simple. Do we see any roles that Russia play in this conflict between Serbia and Kosovo today? If so, take us through it.
So Russia's been quiet on this. They have spoken out in favor of the Serbs living in Kosovo, and Serbia remains described as a close Russian friend and ally. But in terms of Russia's planning, what it would do in a worst case scenario, there hasn't been any word on that. It's interesting, though, that up until these conflicts started to happen, there was actually a leaked Pentagon cable that said that Serbia was supporting the Ukrainians in the war in Ukraine. And of course, that's been vehemently denied by the Serbian government and by Russia itself. But it's interesting that had occurred before. Within Serbia, there are reports that there are a lot of people that support Russia's war in Ukraine, and there are reports of Serbian volunteers working with the Russian army in Ukraine. But it's difficult to say what Russia would do in this scenario, but it could easily come to a flashpoint if there was ever, another NATO-led action against Serbia. Russia was certainly not happy with the NATO-led action against Serbia in 1999, and was very, very vocal about it. But that was a Russia of a different time. That was Yeltsin's Russia. That was a much more internationalist, Western-friendly Russia than what you have today. And how Putin's Russia might respond to any kind of escalation where it's NATO-led against Serbia could be much, much worse. And that, I think, is what NATO is trying to avoid right now, at least on the surface. Because adding another dimension to this war just ratchets up the tensions between the East and West in ways that can't be calculated.
Adam, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the very simple question. Again, when we see the conflict, we always say it's the testament or it's a test for modern leaders. Now, let's go back to the current president of Serbia. as we are continue to follow the war, follow the conflict, and also looking at the tension between Serbia and Kosovo, how much do you think it could actually impact the current presidents of Serbia? So in other words, we don't want to see another dictatorship in the house, and we don't want to see, surely don't want to see a ruthless leader in the house. But again, based on what you said and also your analysis, that neither side is willing to budge at this moment. So how much do you think the tension between Serbia and Kosovo can actually hurt the credibility of the Serbian president or even the Serbian government at this moment?
Yeah. I think Vučić is in a very unenviable position in this regard, because he is a center-right leader who probably didn't plan for this kind of escalation, but he's dealing with a lot of with some very far-right political groups in his country. He draws support from them, and as such, he has to court them at times. And so, if he were to look weak in front of the Serbian far right, it could undermine his base of power. And so it could very easily push him to further escalation, whether or not he wants that. So I think that it's something that has to be watched out for. And I think that is why the NATO community is really trying to de-escalate this and trying to rein in Kosovo as well, because its ability to escalate at this point from both sides could really draw in. If Serbia were to be drawn into a unilateral action against Kosovo, it would mean that there are NATO troops right there. And how Moscow responds to that, it's something I think that both sides actually want to avoid, but given the political climate, might be difficult.
That makes sense, Adam. I agree with you 100%. Again, at the end of the day, we all want to say it's violence or war or conflict should never be the solution to any disagreement or to any problems. Because again, today, when we look at the world, look at the international community, we have seen the devastation of the conflict, and we have witnessed that how war and conflict especially brought tragedy upon people and innocent citizens. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Adam Rousselle. Again, Adam Rousselle is an author and editor with a background in geopolitics and political economy. Adam, thank you so much for your insight, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to follow the tension between Serbia and also Kosovo. Of course, any other matters around the world. Also, thank you so much for doing this.